And one may, of course, question this premise. Should we build up a fund in this way, or should we use the money in other ways? That is one discussion which is an important discussion, which has important political and ethical aspects. But the ethical guidelines, they take this as a premise that we shall have this financial fund, which shall operate as a global investor with the primal objective of securing the best possible return of this investment. It is, as we heard, among the world's largest institutional investors today, and there are some basic challenges then to this from an ethical point of view. If we look at, so to say, the landscape behind claims for corporate responsibility and socially responsible investments, which is a more general debate as well. It's not just a debate about the Norwegian Pension Fund, but it's a general debate about the responsibility of investors, and specifically institutional investors in general, and also of business operating on a global scale. I think one basic premise is that compliance with legal rules is not sufficient. We cannot create a sustainable development globally. We cannot create responsible practices by just complying with legal rules. The reason behind this, of course, is that law has to have its limits. Law has to be separated from morality. We don't want a society where we enforce morality as legal rules, because we want legal security. We want the rule of law. So we want the limits of legal enforcement to be more limited than the ethical and moral claims that we put on operators in society. Also, we know, I think, that it is not possible to engage globally in the world economy without doing morally questionable things. All businesses operate in an area where they can be and they must be challenged from a moral point of view and a political point of view. We have the free market system, which gives the freedom to market operators to ensure profits, and ensuring profits will very often entail doing morally questionable things. So we have to keep up the moral criticism of market operators anywhere. I think it's also important to keep in mind that the states use their market power in addition to their regulatory powers, maybe increasingly. We see this in procurement rules, where the EU procurement rules have been developed, and there's no question anymore that states may take environmental and social considerations in their procurement. This was debated and questionable 10 years ago. Today, it's accepted by all, and what is discussed is where the limit is. We see the engagement of public entities in public-private partnerships, and we see increasing demands then of ethics in business practices, both in terms of demands for corporate responsibility and also social responsible investments. But I think when we look at this, that it's important to keep in mind that using the state's market power, and especially using the state's market power as an institutional investor, is in many cases not the most efficient way that the states can use their power. It's not the most efficient way that states can influence big business by investment decisions. They have more efficient means. Listening to this description on Monsanto, I would say that why do countries legalize GMOs? That's one basic question. It's part of the use or non-use of the state's regulatory powers. Of course, prohibiting GMO-modified seeds in a country is far more efficient than trying to influence companies' business practices in a jurisdiction where GMOs are legal. Why do countries agree to patenting of life organisms? Why do countries agree to the TRIPS agreement? Disengagement from such public international agreements is, of course, far more efficient than other types of interventions into the market. Why are competition rules not enforced? Why are antitrust rules not enforced? Companies like Monsanto, who have a monopoly or have a dominant position in the market, are under quite stringent requirements of not abusing this dominant position. Consider, for example, the case against Microsoft and the bundling of the Internet Explorer with the Microsoft operating system. That was a typical example of use of antitrust legislation. And the use of antitrust legislation in an issue like this is, of course, far more efficient than other ways. So I think the basic question should be to make states responsible to enact and enforce the use of state power against this type of actions from actors in the market. The challenges then specifically to the ethical guidelines and the application of the ethical guidelines of the Petroleum Fund, trying to achieve more social responsibility through the investments, is on the one hand that a long-term returns is an ethical obligation on the state. If we accept the premise that we shall exploit petroleum resources in the measure that we do, we also accept that we have a responsibility of securing the value of these resources in a way for future generations. And this means that ensuring long-term returns is an ethical obligation in itself. And that means that social responsible investment should be based on the long-term return and not the short-term return on the investment. And long-term returns, of course, is dependent upon a sustainable development of the global economy. Because if the global economy does not develop in a sustainable way, if the global economy operates in a way to undermine ecological and social sustainable developments, then the returns in the long run will not be secured. Also, there's a challenge to the legitimacy of operating such a big fund. The legitimacy which arises from being involved in global markets to the extent that the Norwegian government is. And also, related to the legitimacy is the credibility of the policies of the government in these fields. And one might say then that socially responsible investment guidelines is an instrument to increase transparency, to increase corporate responsibility, and to incite ethical behavior, both a part of the fund itself and on behalf of the businesses where one is invested. So how can one then go about doing this, and what is, so to say, the rationale behind the guidelines which are in force for the pension fund? Well, these guidelines are in a way operating between law, morality and politics. On the one hand, law and legal measures are insufficient to achieve anything as an investor. The state cannot use law, so to say, to achieve its objectives here. Due to some simple facts, corporations are not liable under international law. The questions that we are discussing is part national law, it's part Norwegian law, part US law, part Indian law, and so on. But it's also part international law. We have an international agreement setting standards on human rights, labor rights, environmental agreements, and so on. But corporations are not, as such, liable entities under international law. So the international agreements